His fingers locked around my throat before I could even step back. Not a shove, not a warning. A grip. Hard, certain, final. My spine slammed against the oak cabinet, the impact rattling the plates inside. The air rushed out of my lungs in one sharp gasp that never came back. His thumb pressed into the soft hollow of my neck, cutting off what little breath I had left. I looked up at my son, and I didn't recognize him. Thatcher's face was twisted, his jaw tight, his eyes empty of anything human. The smell of bourbon hit me first, thick, sour, clinging to his breath as it washed over my face. "Obey me, you useless old woman," he roared. Each word struck harder than his hand. My fingers clawed at his wrist, not to fight him. No, I was too weak for that, but to remind him who I was. The woman who carried him for 9 months. The one who stayed up through fevers and nightmares. The one who built this house into a home. But none of that mattered. Not anymore. My vision blurred at the edges. My ears rang. The world shrank down to the pressure on my throat and the sound of his voice echoing through my skull. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I heard it. A laugh. Soft, amused, enjoying every second. I forced my eyes past his shoulder. Sloane stood there, leaning against the counter, a glass of wine in her hand. Smiling like this was entertainment. If this shocks you, subscribe. Next time it could be your home. Have you ever looked at someone you love and realized they're gone? Not physically. Worse. Gone in a way you can't fix. Tell me, what would you do if your own child became your enemy? Would you fight back? Would you scream? Or would you stand there like I did, frozen, trying to understand how it all went so wrong? Because in that moment, I wasn't thinking about survival. I was thinking about memories. His first steps across this very kitchen floor. The way he used to cling to my dress when strangers came around. How he once cried because he thought a thunderstorm might take me away. That little boy was gone. In his place stood a man who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle. A burden. Something to control. His grip tightened for a second, just enough to remind me how easily he could end it. "Go cook my dinner," he hissed, his voice low now, colder, more dangerous than the shouting. Behind him, Sloane took a slow sip of her wine. Still smiling. Still watching. Like I was the show. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't anger. This wasn't stress. This was who they had become. He shoved me back. Just like that. Like I weighed nothing. I stumbled forward, gripping the edge of the sink, dragging in air that burned all the way down my chest. My hands trembled, but not from fear anymore. Something else had taken its place. Something colder. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't even look at him again. Because in that moment, something inside me shut off. The part of me that still saw him as my son. Dead. Gone. Replaced by something far more dangerous. Clarity. And with that clarity came a decision. A quiet one. A final one. Because what he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. If this ever happened near you, would you be ready? Subscribe now. That night didn't just change me, it ended him. My name is Beatrice Sterling. Most people in Oakhaven, Virginia just call me B. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived in the same white-clapped farmhouse for over 4 decades. It's not the biggest house in town, and it's certainly not the newest, but every inch of it holds a memory I can still feel if I stand still long enough. The front porch still creaks in the same spots where my husband, Arthur, used to sit every evening with his coffee. The kitchen still carries the scent of rosemary and butter, no matter how many windows I open. And the hallway, well, that hallway watched my son take his first steps, one hand stretched toward me, the other gripping the wall like his life depended on it. Back then, Thatcher wasn't a man with sharp words and colder eyes. He was my boy. Arthur used to say, "B, that one's going to be something special." And I believed him. I believed every scraped knee, every school award, every proud moment was leading to a good man. After Arthur passed, the house grew quieter, but it never felt empty. I filled it with routines. Morning tea by the window, tending to the orchard. Evenings with old books and soft music playing low enough not to disturb the peace. It wasn't a lonely life. It was a full one. I had everything I needed. And that was exactly why I didn't hesitate when the call came. Because a mother's love doesn't ask questions. It opens doors. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. I remember because I had just taken a pie out of the oven. Apple, Arthur's favorite. Thatcher's name flashed across the screen. I smiled before I even answered. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, already softening my voice the way mothers do without thinking. But what came through the other end of that line wasn't the confident man I remembered. It was shaky, tired, almost desperate. "Mama, I need your help." Those 4 words can move mountains when they come from your child. He told me he'd lost his job in Richmond, something about a disagreement with the board. He said it wasn't his fault, said people had turned on him, said everything collapsed faster than he could fix it. I didn't press him. I didn't ask for details, because I heard something else in his voice. Fear. "We're about to lose the apartment," he added quietly. I didn't know where else to go. Wait. That meant Sloane too. I paused for a moment, not long enough to think it through, just long enough to feel the weight of what he was asking. Then I said the only thing a mother like me would ever say. "Come home." No conditions. No hesitation. Just an open door. Would you have said yes? Comment yes or no? They arrived 3 days later. I heard the engine before I saw them. A smooth, expensive hum that didn't belong on a quiet country road like mine. When the car pulled into the driveway, I stepped out onto the porch and froze for just a second. A silver SUV. Shiny, clean, far too polished for a couple on the edge of losing everything. Thatcher stepped out first. He looked different. Not broken the way his voice had sounded on the phone. Tense, yes. Worn down, maybe. But not defeated. His eyes moved quickly, scanning the property like he was measuring something I couldn't see. "Hey, Ma," he said, forcing a smile as he walked up the steps. I opened my arms and he hugged me, but it was brief, quick, like a formality instead of comfort. Then Sloane stepped out of the passenger side. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect posture. Not a single sign of struggle. She walked up slowly, her heels clicking against the wooden steps, her gaze drifting across the house with a look I couldn't quite place at the time. "It's charming," she said. Not warm. Not grateful. Just polite enough to pass. Her suitcase rolled in behind her, expensive and spotless, dragging across the same rug I'd woven years ago with my own hands. Inside, I showed them around. The guest room, the kitchen, the sitting area. Thatcher nodded at everything, distracted. Sloane, on the other hand, noticed everything. The wallpaper. The cabinets. The furniture. "This kitchen could really use an update," she said casually, running her fingers along the counter. "If we're going to have guests here, we'd need something more modern." I smiled. Not because I agreed, but because I was still holding on to the version of them I wanted to believe in. "They're just tired," I told myself. "They've been through a lot." But as I stood there, watching them settle in, I felt something small shift in my chest. Not fear. Not yet. Just a quiet feeling I couldn't name. And I ignored it. Because that's what love does sometimes. It sees the warning signs and chooses to look away. At first, it didn't feel like anything serious. Just small things. Little shifts in behavior that were easy to excuse if you wanted to keep the peace. Sloane started it. She had a way of speaking that sounded polite on the surface, but the meaning underneath always carried a sting. "It's just so dated," she said one morning, standing in the living room with her arms folded. "I mean, I get the sentimental value, but don't you ever feel like it's time to move on?" I was dusting the bookshelf when she said it. I paused for a second, then smiled. "This house has served me well," I replied gently. "It's more than enough." She gave a small shrug, like my answer didn't quite satisfy her. "I guess," she said, "but if we're staying here for a while, we might as well make it livable." "We." That word settled in the room heavier than it should have. Over the next few days, her comments became more frequent. The curtains were too old. The furniture was out of style. The kitchen was a problem waiting to be fixed. Each remark was wrapped in a tone that made it sound like she was helping, improving, correcting, but it didn't feel like help. It felt like ownership. And Thatcher, he didn't stop her. He didn't even acknowledge it. He just sat there, scrolling through his phone, nodding occasionally like he agreed but didn't want to say it out loud. That silence said more than words ever could. I kept waiting for him to bounce back, to get up early, make calls, put on a suit, and remind me of the man he used to be. But that never happened. The first week passed, then the second, and Thatcher stopped pretending. He stayed in Arthur's old study most of the day, the door half closed, the smell of bourbon slipping through the cracks. At first, it was one glass in the evening. Then it became something he carried with him all day, like a habit he didn't bother to hide. Phone calls came and went. Short, tense, frustrated. I would hear his voice rise, then drop, then go quiet altogether. "They don't understand what they lost," he muttered once, packing the hallway. "They'll regret it." I wanted to ask him what really happened in Richmond. I wanted to understand. But every time I tried to start that conversation, he shut it down before it could begin. "Not now, Ma," he snapped one afternoon. "You wouldn't get it anyway." That stung more than I expected. Not because of the words, but because of how easily he said them. Like I had suddenly become someone beneath his attention. Someone irrelevant. Days turned into weeks, and the effort I expected from him never came. No job search. No plans. Just complaints. And drinking. And a growing impatience with everything around him, including me. It didn't take long for the tone in the house to change. Requests became expectations. Expectations became demands. "B, can you make something lighter tonight?" Sloane asked one evening, not even looking up from her phone. I nodded, of course. The next day, it wasn't a question. "Don't make anything heavy again. I'm trying to eat clean." Another day passed. "Did you wash my blouse? I left it in the basket." I hadn't. I didn't even know it was there. But the look she gave me made it feel like I had failed some responsibility I never agreed to. Thatcher followed her lead. At first, it was small. "Ma, where's my jacket?" "Ma, did you move my things?" "Ma, you need to keep this place more organized." Each sentence carried a tone I wasn't used to hearing from him. Not frustration. Not even anger. Something worse. Disrespect. One night, I placed dinner on the table. Simple, warm, made with care. He took one bite, then pushed the plate away. "This is cold," he said flatly. "It just came off the stove," I replied, confused. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just stood up, grabbed his glass, and walked away like the meal wasn't worth his time. Sloane didn't say a word. She just kept eating. Like it was normal. Like I was expected to accept it. And the truth is, for a while I did. Because I kept telling myself the same thing. They're under pressure. They've lost a lot. They just need time. I held on to those excuses like they were facts. But deep down, something didn't sit right anymore. The house didn't feel like mine. Not fully. Not the way it used to. There was a weight in the air now. A tension that didn't go away, no matter how quiet things seemed. It started with something so small, I almost laughed it off. My keys. I always kept them in the same place, a small ceramic dish by the front door. Arthur used to joke that if I ever lost them, it would mean the house itself had moved. One morning, they weren't there. I checked the kitchen counter, the dining table, my bedroom. Nothing. I told myself I must have misplaced them. It happens. Age has a way of playing tricks on you, or so people say. I searched for nearly 20 minutes before giving up and reaching for my spare set. Later that evening, I opened the refrigerator to take out some milk. And there they were, sitting right beside the butter dish. I stared at them for a long time, trying to remember, trying to make sense of it. But no matter how hard I thought, I couldn't recall putting them there. Not even a little. When Thatcher walked into the kitchen, I held them up. "Did you move these?" I asked calmly. He barely looked at me. "You probably left them there, Ma," he said with a shrug. "You've been forgetful lately." Forgetful. The word landed heavier than it should have. "I don't put keys in the refrigerator," I replied. He gave a short laugh. "Everyone says that until they do it." Everyone. Not you. Everyone. I didn't argue. But something about the way he said it stayed with me. After that, it didn't stop. It spread. My reading glasses went missing 2 days later. I searched the entire house, growing more frustrated with every passing minute. I checked drawers I hadn't opened in years. I even looked in places I knew didn't make sense. Nothing. Sloane watched me from the couch, her legs crossed, her phone resting lightly in her hand. "Lose something again?" she asked, her tone casual. "My glasses," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She tilted her head slightly. "You really should be more careful," she replied. "It's not safe forgetting things like that." Not safe. The way she said it didn't sound like concern. It sounded like a warning. That evening, I found the glasses, tucked neatly under a sofa cushion. Not dropped. Not misplaced. Placed. I picked them up slowly, turning them over in my hands like they might explain themselves. And that's when a thought crossed my mind. A quiet one, but sharp. What if this wasn't an accident? I didn't say it out loud. Not yet. Instead, I watched. I paid attention. And the more I did, the more things didn't add up. Thatcher began mentioning conversations we never had. "Ma, I told you about the appointment," he said one morning. "You didn't," I replied. He sighed, shaking his head like he was tired of repeating himself. "Yes, I did. You just don't remember." Another time, he insisted I had agreed to something I had never even heard of. "You said it was fine," he snapped. "No, I didn't." "You're doing it again," he muttered under his breath. Doing what? Forgetting. Denying. Losing control. That's what they wanted it to look like. And slowly, they were building their case. The night I understood everything, I wasn't supposed to be awake. I had gone to bed early, or at least that's what they thought. But sleep didn't come easily anymore. Not with the tension in the house. Not with the feeling that something wasn't right. So I got up. Quietly. Carefully. I walked down the hallway, my steps slow, steady, deliberate. That's when I heard their voices. Low. Sharp. Urgent. Coming from the kitchen. I stopped just before the doorway, staying out of sight. "The deed is still in her name," Sloane said, her voice tight with frustration. "We can't do anything until that changes." "I know," Thatcher replied. "Just give it time." "Time," she snapped softly. "We don't have time. The developers are ready. That land is worth millions." Millions. My breath caught, but I didn't move. If she signs the papers, we're out of this mess, Sloane continued. We pay off everything and start over. And if she does? Thatcher asked. There was a pause. Then Sloane spoke again. Colder this time. Then we make it so she doesn't have a choice. Silence filled the room for a moment. I felt my heart begin to pound. What are you suggesting? Thatcher asked. You've already started, she said. The confusion, the memory slips, it's working. A doctor just needs to see it. My stomach dropped. A managed care facility, she added. Somewhere quiet, somewhere permanent. Permanent. The word echoed in my head. She won't fight it, Sloane continued. Not if she believes something's wrong with her. And that's when it hit me. Clear. Sharp. Final. This wasn't concern. This wasn't stress. This was a plan. A calculated effort to take everything I had and erase me in the process. I stepped back slowly, my hand pressed against the wall to steady myself. My son didn't see a mother. He saw a bank account. Was this evil or just survival? Tell me below. That evening felt heavy long before anything was said. The air in the house carried a weight that pressed down on everything, on the walls, the furniture, even the silence between footsteps. I stayed in the kitchen most of the afternoon. Cooking had always been my refuge. It was one of the few places where things still made sense. Measurements were clear, steps were simple, results were predictable. I chose something familiar. A slow-cooked pot roast. Tender beef, carrots from the garden, a touch of rosemary, just the way Arthur used to love it. The kind of meal that filled a house with warmth, the kind that used to bring people together. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe it still could. By the time the sun dipped low, the table was set. Plates arranged neatly, glasses polished, everything in its place. Sloane walked in first. She didn't sit. She lifted the lid from the pot, letting the steam rise into her face. Her expression changed instantly. Disapproval. Beef, she said, her tone flat. I turned from the counter, wiping my hands on a cloth. It's fresh, I said. I made it this afternoon. She placed the lid back down slowly, like she was sealing something she had already judged. I told you we wanted something lighter, she replied. Thatcher doesn't eat like this anymore. I didn't have anything else, I said calmly. The market is far and… That's not really the point, is it? She cut in. Her voice wasn't loud. But it didn't need to be. It carried control. Thatcher walked in, just as the tension settled into the room. He looked worn down, but not in a way that asked for sympathy. More like someone carrying anger with nowhere to put it. What's going on? He asked, glancing between us. Your mother ignored a simple request, Sloane said, her tone measured, almost calm. Again. That word, again, felt deliberate. I faced him, keeping my voice steady. I made dinner with what I had, I said. If you wanted something else, you could have told me earlier. His expression shifted. Not confusion. Not even frustration. Something sharper. You're missing the point, Ma, he said, stepping closer. We're dealing with enough stress as it is. The least you could do is follow a basic request. I felt something rise in my chest, something I had been holding back for weeks. I am the one feeding you, I replied. I am the one keeping this house running. If you want something different, you can go and get it yourself. The room went still. Too still. Sloane didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence gave Thatcher space. And he took it. His jaw tightened, his eyes locked onto mine. For a brief second, I saw something flash there. Not pain. Not disappointment. Something far worse. Loss of control. He moved faster than I expected. One step. Two. And then, his hand was around my neck. Not a slap. Not a shove. A grip. Firm, intentional, crushing. My back hit the cabinet behind me, the impact sending a sharp jolt through my spine. The dishes inside rattled, but I barely heard them. All I could feel was his hand, tightening, cutting off the air before I could even react. "Obey me, you useless old woman," he shouted, his face inches from mine. His breath was hot, thick with alcohol. His fingers pressed harder, forcing my head back against the wood. My hands rose instinctively, gripping his wrist, but there was no strength behind them. No resistance. Just the desperate need to breathe. I looked into his eyes, searching, hopping, for something, anything. But there was nothing there. No hesitation. No regret. Just rage. And control. Behind him, I heard it again. That same soft sound. That laugh. Sloane. She stood near the counter, one hand wrapped around her glass, her shoulders relaxed like she was watching something she enjoyed. "Careful," she said lightly. "We still need her." Need. Not love. Not care. Need. The room tilted. My vision blurred at the edges. My chest burned. And just as suddenly as it began, he let go. I stumbled forward, gripping the edge of the sink. Air rushed back into my lungs, sharp and painful. Each breath felt like it scraped the inside of my throat. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even look at him. Because something inside me had gone quiet. Completely quiet. The fear that should have taken over didn't. Instead, there was stillness. A cold, steady awareness that settled deep in my chest. He turned away from me, like nothing had happened. "Fix the food," he muttered, "and don't mess it up this time." Sloane followed him out, her laughter fatting down the hallway. And just like that, they were gone, leaving me alone in the kitchen. Alone with the sound of my breathing. Alone with the sting in my throat. Alone with the truth. I stood there for a long time. Not moving. Not thinking. Just standing. Until one thought finally settled in my mind. Clear. Final. Unshakable. The mother in me died. She never saw it coming. Don't be that blind. Subscribe. The house was quiet that night. Not peaceful. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in on you, filling every corner until it feels louder than noise. I didn't finish the dinner. I didn't clean the kitchen. I didn't even turn off the stove right away. I just stood there, my hand resting lightly against my throat, feeling the tenderness where his fingers had been. There should have been tears. There should have been fear. But neither came. Instead, there was a strange sense of clarity. Like something had been stripped away. All the excuses I had made for him, gone. All the patience I had stretched thin, gone. All the hope that this was temporary, gone. I walked slowly to the sink and turned off the heat. Then I wiped my hands, steady and calm. Not shaking anymore. Not uncertain. Just steady. That was the moment I understood something I had refused to accept before. This wasn't going to fix itself. This wasn't going to pass. And no one was coming to save me. I didn't go to my bedroom. Not yet. Instead, I walked past it, down the narrow hallway, and toward a door most people wouldn't notice. It sat just beside the cellar entrance. Plain. Unmarked. Easy to ignore. But behind it was a small storage space Arthur had built years ago. We used it for important things, old records, documents, items that mattered enough to keep safe but not visible enough to invite questions. I opened the door and stepped inside. The air was cooler there. Still, untouched by the tension that had taken over the rest of the house. I reached for the small lamp on the shelf and turned it on. Soft light filled the space. Everything was exactly where I had left it. Neat. Ordered. Controlled. I pulled out an old notebook from the back corner. Plain cover, nothing special. But it would serve its purpose. I sat down on the wooden stool and opened it to the first blank page. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I picked up a pen, and I began to write. Assault. I wrote the words carefully, clearly. No emotion in the ink. Just facts. What he said. What he did. What I saw. I wrote about the pressure on my throat, the look in his eyes, the sound of her laughter. Every detail I could remember, I put it down. Not for comfort. Not for closure. For evidence. When I finished, I closed the notebook and held it in my hands for a moment. This wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about making sure I never doubted myself again. Because that's what they wanted. Doubt. Confusion. Weakness. But I wasn't giving them that anymore. I stood up slowly and placed the notebook back on the shelf. Then I reached further into the storage space and pulled out something else. Something small. Black. Unremarkable at first glance. But powerful. A device I had bought weeks earlier, during one of my quiet trips into town. I had hoped I wouldn't need it. I had hoped things would settle before it came to this. I was wrong. I turned the device over in my hand, feeling its weight. Light. Simple. But it carried possibilities. Options. Control. For the first time in weeks, I felt it. Not fear. Not anger. Control. I stepped out of the storage space and closed the door behind me. The house was still quiet. They were upstairs. Unaware. Comfortable. Certain they had already won. I looked down the hallway toward the kitchen, toward the place where everything had changed. And I made my decision. Not rushed. Not emotional. Final. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was preparing. I didn't act immediately. That was the difference between fear and control. Fear reacts. Control waits. The next morning, I moved through the house the same way I always had. Slow steps, quiet presence, no sudden changes. I made breakfast. I spoke when spoken to. I kept my eyes lowered, just enough to seem harmless. They believed it. That was the first advantage. By afternoon, I found my moment. Sloane was outside on the porch, scrolling through her phone, lost in whatever world she preferred over the one she was living in. Thatcher was upstairs, packing and arguing into his phone again. I walked into the kitchen. Calm. Measured. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small black device. It looked like nothing important. Just a wall charger. The kind no one pays attention to. I plugged it into the outlet near the counter, adjusting it slightly until the angle was right. Then I stepped back. Nothing changed. No blinking lights. No sound. Just another object in a room full of objects. Perfect. I repeated the process twice more that day. One in the living room. Another in the study. 3 points. 3 angles. 3 silent witnesses. By the time evening came, the house looked exactly the same. But it was. Not anymore. The first night, I didn't check the recordings. I didn't need to. I knew they would talk. People like them always do. Especially when they think no one is listening. The second night, I watched. Alone in my room, the door locked, the curtains drawn. I connected the device and pressed play. The screen flickered to life. And there they were. Comfortable. Relaxed. Careless. Sloane sat on the couch, her legs tucked under her, a glass of wine resting loosely in her hand. Thatcher stood near the window, his voice low but sharp. "They're not answering," he said, packing. "Every number I call just goes dead." "Because they know what you did," Sloane replied, not even looking up. "You pushed too far." He stopped. Turned. What was I supposed to do? He snapped. Let everything collapse. You already did that, she said calmly. Now we fix it. Fix it. The words sounded simple, but the tone behind them was anything but. She leaned forward slightly, setting her glass down. The land is the only solution, she continued. Once we get control of it, everything else falls into place. I paused the video, rewound it, played it again. The certainty in her voice told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't desperation. This was planning. Over the next few days, I watched everything. Every conversation. Every careless word. Every moment they believed belonged only to them. And piece by piece, the truth came together. It wasn't just about losing a job. It wasn't even just about debt. It was much worse. One recording, in particular, changed everything. Thatcher sat at the desk in the study, his laptop open, his face lit by the glow of the screen. Sloane stood behind him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. You need to move it now, she said, before anyone traces it. I am moving it, he replied, his voice tight. It takes time. Time is exactly what you don't have, she snapped. That audit is coming. Audit? I leaned closer to the screen. What if they already know? Thatcher asked. They don't, she said firmly. Not yet, but if you hesitate, they will. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. That money wasn't supposed to be touched, he muttered. And yet here we are, she replied. Silence followed. Heavy. Then he spoke again. It was temporary, he said. I was going to put it back. Sloane let out a quiet laugh. They always say that. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I watched. Because I understood now. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't poor judgment. It was theft. Calculated. Intentional. He had taken money that didn't belong to him. Money meant for people who had worked their entire lives. Retired teachers. Workers. People who trusted that what they earned would be there when they needed it. And he had used it. To maintain a life he couldn't afford. To impress a woman who demanded more than he could give. To protect an image that was already falling apart. It didn't stop there. The more I watched, the clearer it became. Hidden accounts. Transfers made in small amounts to avoid attention. Names I didn't recognize. Locations far from anywhere they had ever lived. Offshore accounts. Layered. Hidden. Carefully handled. But not careful enough. Because now, I had it. Every word. Every move. Every lie. Documented. Saved. Secured. I sat back in my chair, the screen still glowing in front of me. My hands rested calmly in my lap. No shaking. No doubt. Just certainty. They thought they were taking everything from me. My home. My dignity. My life. But what they didn't realize was that they had given me something far more valuable. Proof. What I found was worse than the assault. I didn't rush into action. Rushing leads to mistakes. And mistakes were something I could no longer afford. The next morning, I left the house just after sunrise. I told them I was going into town for groceries. Neither of them questioned it. That was the second advantage. They had already decided I wasn't worth watching. The drive into Oakhaven was quiet, familiar. The same roads I had traveled for years now carried a different purpose. I parked outside the sheriff's office and sat in the car for a moment. Not hesitating. Just choosing my words carefully. Then I stepped out. Sheriff Daniel Miller had been part of this town long before he wore a badge. I remembered him as a boy, sitting cross-legged on the library floor, struggling to read his first chapter book while I guided him through every page. He remembered me too. Miss B, he said as I walked in, his expression shifting from routine to concern. Everything all right? I smiled gently. I hope so, I replied. We sat in his office, the door closed, the noise of the station fading into the background. I need you to listen, I said, and I need you to keep this between us for now. He didn't interrupt. He didn't question. He just listened. I didn't give him everything. Not yet. Just enough. Concerns about financial activity. Strange behavior in my home. A feeling that something wasn't right. His expression changed as I spoke. Focused. Serious. I'll keep an eye on things, he said finally, quietly. That was all I needed. For now. My next stop wasn't about protection. It was about exposure. Clara Higgins had been running the Oak Haven Historical Society for nearly a decade. If something happened in this town, she knew about it. And more importantly, she knew who needed to know. I found her in her office, surrounded by old records and photographs. "B," she exclaimed, standing up with a bright smile. "What a surprise." I returned the smile, warm and steady. "I have an idea," I said. That caught her attention immediately. Clara loved ideas. "What kind of idea?" she asked, already curious. I took a seat across from her and folded my hands neatly in my lap. "I want to host a gala," I said. "A proper one, something to celebrate the history of the Sterling farmhouse." Her eyes lit up. "Oh, that would be wonderful," she said. "It's been too long since we've had something like that." "I want it to be special," I continued. "Formal, memorable, I want everyone there." "Everyone?" she asked. I nodded. "The mayor, the judge, local business owners, anyone who matters in this town." Clara didn't hesitate. "Consider it done," she said. "We'll make it the event of the season." I leaned forward slightly. "There's one more thing," I added. She paused. "I want it to be a surprise," I said, "for Thatcher and Sloane." Clara smiled. "Oh, B, that's lovely." Lovely. That's what she thought it was. And I let her. When I returned home, nothing had changed on the surface. Sloane was in the living room, scrolling through her phone. Thatcher was in the study, his voice low as he spoke to someone I couldn't see. The house looked the same. But I wasn't the same woman who had left it that morning. That evening, I brought up the gala at dinner. Casually. Carefully. "I've been thinking," I said, keeping my tone soft. "The house turns 100 this year. I thought it might be nice to celebrate." Thatcher barely looked up. "A party?" he asked. "Something small," I replied. "Just the town, a way to honor the family name." Sloane looked interested. "What kind of people would be there?" she asked. I met her gaze. "The kind your husband might want to meet," I said. That was enough. Thatcher looked up then. Really looked. For the first time in days. "Investors?" he asked. "Possibly," I said. He leaned back in his chair, considering it. I could see the shift. Not in emotion. In calculation. "Fine," he said after a moment. "Just don't make it embarrassing." "I wouldn't dream of it," I replied. Sloane smiled faintly, already imagining what she could gain from it. And just like that, they agreed. They thought they were walking into an opportunity. They didn't realize. They were walking into a stage. We all know someone like this, don't we? The moment they agreed to the gala, I knew the real work had begun. Agreement wasn't enough. I needed investment. I needed Thatcher to believe this event mattered to him. Not to me. Not to the town. To him. Over the next few days, I brought it up in small, careful doses. Never too much. Never too obvious. Just enough to let the idea grow in his mind. "I spoke with Clara again," I said one morning while pouring tea. "She mentioned a few people who might attend." He didn't look up at first. But I noticed the pause. "What kind of people?" he asked. The kind who appreciate land, I replied. Developers, investors, people with interest in expansion. That got his attention. He set his glass down slowly. And they'd come here, he asked. If the invitation is right, I said, and if the property impresses them. He leaned back, thinking. I could almost see the numbers forming behind his eyes. Opportunities. Solutions. Escape. Sloane joined in without hesitation. That could actually work, she said, turning toward him. If they see the land in person, it changes everything. I stayed quiet, letting them build the idea themselves. Because when people believe something is their idea, they defend it. The shift in Thatcher was immediate. Subtle at first, but unmistakable. He started asking questions. More detailed, more focused. How many acres again? What's the zoning situation? Has anyone made offers before? I answered everything calmly, carefully, always giving just enough to keep him interested, but not enough to satisfy him. The land has value, I said one afternoon, more than most people realize. That was all it took. From that moment on, the gala wasn't just a gathering in his mind. It became a gateway, a chance to fix everything. Or at least, that's what he believed. He began walking the property again, measuring it with his eyes, pointing things out to Sloane. If we cleared this section, it could open up space, he said. She nodded, already picturing it. And the house itself, she added. It could be restored, updated, turned into something high-end. They spoke about it like I wasn't even there. Like the place they stood in didn't belong to me. Like it was already theirs. I listened. Quiet. Still. Letting them go further. Because the deeper they stepped into their own thinking, the harder it would be to pull back. But interest alone wasn't enough. I needed something more. I needed Thatcher to feel in control. So I gave him what he wanted. Or at least, what he thought he wanted. That evening, I sat at the table before dinner, my hands resting lightly in my lap. When he walked in, I looked up slowly. There's something I wanted to discuss, I said. He sighed slightly, like he was already tired of the conversation. What is it? I hesitated. Just enough to make it believable. I've been thinking about the future, I said quietly. About the house, the land, everything. That got his attention. He sat down. Sloane followed. I'm not as strong as I used to be, I continued, and I know I can't manage all of this forever. The words felt strange, coming out of my mouth. Not because they weren't partly true, but because of how I was using them. I want to make sure things are handled properly, I added, that everything is taken care of. Thatcher leaned forward slightly. What are you saying? He asked. I lowered my gaze. I'm saying I trust you, I replied. That did it. I saw it in his expression. Relief. Validation. Control. Exactly what I needed him to feel. Sloane placed her hand on his arm, her lips curling into a small smile. We'll make sure everything is handled, she said softly. Of course they would. That was the plan. Just not the one they believed in. From that moment on, I became someone else. Not entirely, but enough. I moved slower. Spoke softer. Let small mistakes slip through. Nothing obvious. Nothing that could be proven. Just enough to support the image they were already building. The confused mother. The aging woman. The one who needed guidance. Needed help. Needed them. Thatcher began correcting me more often. Sloane watched me more closely. And every time they did, I gave them exactly what they expected. A pause. A hesitation. A quiet acceptance. They thought they were gaining ground. They thought they were moving closer to control. But in reality, They were stepping exactly where I needed them to. Every word I spoke, every look I gave, every moment of weakness I showed, was chosen, deliberate, precise, because this wasn't survival anymore. This was performance, and I intended to give them a show they would never forget. The days leading up to the gala moved quickly. On the surface, it looked like preparation. Cleaning, arranging, hosting duties. But that wasn't where my focus was. Every quiet moment, every hour they spent distracted, I used it. I returned to the storage room each night, locking the door behind me before switching on the lamp. The notebook sat where I had left it, now heavier with entries, each one marking a step closer to the truth. Beside it lay the recordings, carefully labeled, organized, secured. I reviewed them again and again. Not because I needed to remember, but because I needed to choose. Which moments mattered most? Which words would carry weight? Which truths would be impossible to ignore? The footage of the assault, the conversations about the land, the quiet admissions of what they had done with money that was never theirs. Each clip served a purpose. Each one told part of the story. And together, they formed something complete, something undeniable. I copied everything onto a single drive. Small, simple, easy to carry, but powerful enough to change everything. When I held it in my hand, I didn't feel fear, only certainty. The next step required something more personal, something they wouldn't expect. I went up to the attic. It had been years since I last spent time there. Dust rested on the old wooden beams, and boxes sat untouched, filled with pieces of a life that once was. I moved slowly through them. Carefully, deliberately. Photographs, letters, documents, fragments of memory. I found what I needed in a box, marked with Arthur's handwriting. Inside were records of the farmhouse, ownership papers, old photographs showing the land through the years. Proof of what this place had always been. Not just property, legacy. I gathered them into a neat stack and carried them downstairs. Then I began assembling the scrapbooks, page by page, layer by layer. Each one told a story. The foundation of the house, the growth of the land, the life we built here. And finally, the present. I added printed stills from the recordings, moments frozen in time, words captured in ink, truth placed beside history, so no one could separate one from the other. When I finished, I closed the final book and ran my hand across the cover. This wasn't just evidence. It was context. It was meaning. It was everything they tried to erase, brought back into the light. By the final evening, the house was ready. Clean. Ordered. Prepared for guests. Soft lights placed carefully along the walls. Tables arranged for conversation. Every detail considered. Sloane moved through the rooms with visible satisfaction, adjusting decorations, checking her reflection in every mirror she passed. "This might actually turn out well," she said, her tone lighter than usual. Thatcher stood near the window, watching the driveway like he expected opportunity to arrive early. "It will," he replied. "It has to." They believed in the event now. Fully. Completely. Not because of what it meant, but because of what they thought it would give them. I watched them from across the room, my expression calm, my posture steady. To them, I was still the same. Still fragile. Still uncertain. Still under their control. That belief made everything easier. That night, I walked through the house one last time. Room by room. Checking everything. Not decorations. Not furniture. Details. Positions. Timing. Flow. Every step had to align. Every moment had to land exactly where it needed to. When I finished, I returned to the hallway and paused. Listening. The house was quiet again. But this time, it felt different. Not heavy. Not tense. Ready. I looked toward the front door. Toward the place where everything would begin. And I allowed myself one final thought. They thought they were winning. That was their mistake. The evening arrived exactly as planned. Cars filled the driveway one by one, headlights sweeping across the front of the house before settling into neat lines along the gravel. Voices followed, polite greetings, quiet laughter, the low hum of people stepping into what they believed was a celebration. The farmhouse stood proud under the warm glow of carefully placed lights. Inviting. Respectable. Unchanged. At least, that's what it looked like. I stood near the entrance, greeting each guest as they arrived. My posture was steady, my smile soft, my voice calm. Thank you for coming. I'm so glad you could make it. Familiar faces filled the room. The mayor. Local business owners. Families who had known me for decades. And among them, Sheriff Miller. He met my eyes briefly as he stepped inside. No words. Just a small nod. That was enough. Across the room, Thatcher moved through the crowd with a confidence I hadn't seen in weeks. His posture was straight, his voice measured, his smile carefully placed. He shook hands. He introduced himself. He spoke about opportunities and potential. Sloane stayed close to him, her presence polished, her tone smooth as she added to every conversation. They looked like they belonged there. Like they had always belonged there. And for a moment, others believed it. That was the beauty of appearances. They hold until they don't. The room settled as the evening progressed. Drinks were served. Conversations deepened. Laughter grew louder. Everything unfolded exactly the way they expected. Exactly the way they needed it to. Which made what came next even more powerful. I stepped forward slowly, drawing just enough attention without forcing it. Thank you all for being here tonight, I said, my voice clear but gentle. The room quieted. Faces turned. Thatcher glanced over, mildly curious. Sloane followed his gaze, her expression calm. This home has stood for generations, I continued. It has seen growth, change, and resilience. Heads nodded. People listened. I paused, letting the words settle before continuing. But tonight, I want to share something more personal. That shifted the room. Attention sharpened. Interest deepened. Behind me, the screen, placed carefully near the far wall, remained dark. Waiting. I took a small breath. Then I stepped aside. The screen flickered to life. At first, it showed something simple. Old photographs. The house through the years. Arthur standing on the porch, smiling into the sun. A younger version of me beside him. Then Thatcher. As a child. Running through the yard. Laughing. Innocent. The room softened. People smiled. Some even laughed quietly. It was familiar. Comforting. Safe. Then the images changed. The tone shifted. The screen cut to the kitchen. Recent footage. Clear. Undeniable. Thatcher's voice filled the room. Sharp. Angry. Obey me, you useless old woman. The words hit the air like a shockwave. The room froze. The footage continued. His hand around my throat. My body pressed against the cabinet. The struggle. The silence. Sloane's laughter in the background. Every second played out in front of them. Unfiltered. Unavoidable. Gasps broke through the silence. Someone dropped a glass. The sound shattered against the floor, but no one looked away. Because they couldn't. Thatcher stepped back, his face draining of color. What is this? He demanded. But no one answered him, because the answer was already on the screen. The footage didn't stop. It shifted again, this time to the study. Thatcher sat at the desk, his voice tense. "You need to move it now, before anyone traces it." Sloane's voice followed. "That audit is coming." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Confusion. Concern. Disbelief. The recording continued. "It was temporary," Thatcher said. "I was going to put it back." "People always say that," Sloane replied. The room changed. The mood shifted from shock to something heavier. Realization. Understanding. This wasn't just a family matter. This was something bigger. Something serious. I stepped forward again, my voice steady. "The money he's talking about," I said, "was never his." All eyes turned to me. "It belonged to people who trusted him," I continued. "People who worked their entire lives believing their future was secure." Silence followed. Deep. Heavy. Unavoidable. Thatcher shook his head, his voice rising. "This isn't what it looks like," he snapped. "You don't understand." But the room had already made its decision. Because they did understand. Perfectly. That's when Sheriff Miller moved. Calm. Measured. Certain. He stepped forward, his presence cutting through the tension without raising his voice. "Thatcher Sterling," he said, "we're going to need you to come with us." The words landed with finality. Two deputies appeared behind him, quiet but firm. Thatcher looked around, searching for support. For denial. For anything that might save him. But there was nothing. Only eyes. Watching. Judging. Seeing him clearly for the first time. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "You can't do this." Sloane stepped back. Not toward him. Away from him. Her expression had changed completely. No more confidence. No more control. Just distance. Protection of herself. Thatcher noticed. Of course he did. And in that moment, he understood. Not everything. But enough. The deputies moved closer. One reached for his arm. He didn't fight. Not really. Because there was nothing left to fight with. The truth had already taken everything. As they led him toward the door, he turned once. Just once. And looked at me. Not with anger. Not with control. But with something else. Something smaller. Something broken. "Ma," he started. But the word didn't go any further. Because there was nothing left between us to hold it. I didn't respond. I didn't move. I simply stood there, watching. The same way he had watched me struggle. The same way she had laughed. Only now. The roles were reversed. The door opened. The night air rushed in. And just like that, he was gone. Did he deserve this, or was it too far? The sound of the door closing behind them didn't end anything. It began it. Outside, the quiet night carried a different kind of tension. Guests drifted toward the windows, drawn by the movement in the driveway. The low murmur inside the house followed them, curiosity pulling them closer to what they had just witnessed. Through the glass, the scene unfolded. Thatcher stood near the patrol car, his posture no longer confident. The sharp edges of his presence had softened into something uncertain. Something exposed. Sheriff Miller spoke to him briefly, his tone calm, controlled, leaving no space for argument. One of the deputies guided Thatcher toward the vehicle, his hand firm but not forceful. There was no struggle. No resistance. Only a quiet acceptance that settled over him like weight he could no longer carry. The car door opened. For a moment, he hesitated. Not because he could escape, but because stepping inside meant accepting what came next. Then he lowered himself into the seat. The door shut. And with that sound, The man who walked into this house, believing he was in control, was no longer in control of anything. Inside the house, the shift was just as clear. Sloane hadn't followed him. She hadn't moved at all. She stood near the center of the room, surrounded by people who now looked at her very differently. Moments ago, she had been composed, polished, certain of her place. Now, that certainty was gone. Her eyes moved quickly, searching the room. Not for Thatcher. For reactions. For judgment. And she found it. Whispers spread from one corner to another. Quiet, but impossible to ignore. She knew. You could hear it in the recording. They planned everything. Each word chipped away at the image she had built. Her posture shifted. Shoulders tightening. Breath growing shallow. "This isn't what it looks like," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the room. No one answered. No one defended her. Because there was nothing left to defend. "I didn't do anything," she added, louder now. "I didn't take any money, I didn't." Her voice caught. Not from emotion. From realization. Because for the first time, she understood something she hadn't considered before. She had been heard. Seen. Recorded. Every word. Every plan. Every moment she believed was private. Now belonged to everyone in that room. Her composure didn't shatter all at once. It slipped. Piece by piece. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, softer now, almost to herself. The words hung in the air. Uncertain. Unconvincing. She took a step back, her heel catching slightly against the edge of the rug. For a brief moment, she looked unsteady, like the ground beneath her had shifted in a way she couldn't correct. "I was just trying to fix things," she continued. "We were trying to fix things." No one responded. Because the truth had already been shown. No explanation could reshape it. No excuse could soften it. The room didn't need more words. It had already seen enough. Sloane's gaze moved again, finally landing on me. There was no confidence left in it. No control. Only a question she didn't dare ask out loud. Why? But she already knew the answer. Because she had been there. Because she had laughed. Because she had chosen her place in all of it. And now, she was standing in the result. Alone. One by one, the guests began to step away from her. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just enough to create space. Distance. A quiet separation that said everything without a single word. Conversations resumed, but softer now. More focused. No longer about the house. Or the event. But about what had just happened. About what had been revealed. Sloane remained where she was, her presence shrinking in a room that had once felt like an opportunity. Now, it was something else entirely. A place where truth had taken hold. And refused to let go. I watched from across the room, my expression unchanged. Not satisfied. Not relieved. Just steady. Because this wasn't about victory. It was about consequence. And consequence had finally arrived. The house felt different the next morning. Not empty. Not broken. Just still. The kind of stillness that comes after something has ended for good. The guests were gone. The cars had disappeared from the driveway. The voices that once filled the rooms had faded into memory. All that remained was quiet. I walked through each room slowly, taking in what was left behind. Chairs slightly out of place. Glasses waiting to be cleared. Small reminders that something important had happened here. But none of it felt heavy anymore. None of it pressed against me the way it had before. Because the tension that once lived in these walls was gone. I opened the windows, letting fresh air move through the house. It carried a sense of calm with it, something I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe without thinking about it. And that alone was enough. In the days that followed, the town began to respond. Quietly at first, then with purpose. Sheriff Miller kept his word. The evidence I provided moved through the proper channels, and the truth didn't stay hidden for long. Investigations opened. Accounts were reviewed. And the damage Thatcher caused came fully into view. But what mattered most to me wasn't what he lost. It was what could still be restored. I met with a local attorney and arranged something I had been thinking about for days. A scholarship fund. Small at first, but meaningful. It would support students from Oakhaven, those who worked hard, those who needed a chance, those who deserved something better than what they were given. I named it after Arthur, because he believed in building something that lasted beyond you. And this would last. Each document was signed with care. Each detail handled properly. Not rushed. Not careless. Done right. Because that's how things should be done. With time, the house found its rhythm again. Not the same as before, but steady. Familiar. True. I cleaned each room myself. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. I folded away what didn't belong. I repaired what had been disturbed. I placed things back where they had always been. The kitchen returned first. Warm. Welcoming. A place where food meant comfort again, not tension. Then the living room. Quiet evenings replaced restless ones. Books found their way back into my hands. Music returned, soft, steady, present. Even the porch felt different. I sat there one evening as the sun lowered, just as Arthur used to. The same creak beneath the chair. The same view across the land. Only now. There was no unease tied to it. No waiting. No watching. Just peace. And that peace didn't come from forgetting what happened. It came from knowing it was over. People often believe strength looks loud. Like raised voices. Like force. Like fighting back the moment something goes wrong. But that's not the only kind of strength. Sometimes, strength is quiet. It's the ability to stand still when everything around you is pushing you to break. It's the discipline to wait, to think, to choose your moment instead of reacting to theirs. I didn't win because I was stronger than him. I won because I was patient. Because I paid attention. Because I refused to let his actions define how my story would end. There's a difference between being kind and being weak. I was kind to my son for years. I gave him everything I could. But kindness doesn't mean you allow yourself to be destroyed. And silence. Silence doesn't mean surrender. It can mean you're watching, learning, preparing, and when the time comes, acting. Stories like mine make people uncomfortable because they force a question most don't want to answer. What would you do if the person you trusted most became the one who hurt you? Would you keep forgiving? Would you keep hopping? Or would you finally draw a line? Too many people wait too long. They explain things away. They make excuses. They convince themselves it will change, that it has to change. But not everything does. And not everyone deserves endless chances. There comes a moment when you have to choose yourself. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But out of respect for your own life. Because if you don't protect your peace, no one else will. I still think about that night sometimes. Not with pain. Not with regret. But with clarity. Because it showed me exactly where I stood. And more importantly, it showed me what I was capable of when I stopped pretending everything was fine. Life doesn't always give you fair situations. It doesn't always give you kind people. But it does give you choices. And the one choice that matters most is whether you allow yourself to stay powerless or you decide to take control. I made my choice, and it changed everything. If you stayed till the end, you understand. Subscribe for more truths. If you won't subscribe, explain why. What are you ignoring? If you wouldn't subscribe, tell me why below.